I used to believe that when your life was about to change forever, you'd feel it coming. Like a distant storm rolling in, an eerie stillness before the chaos, a gut feeling that something wasn't quite right. But when my world shattered, there was no warning. No uneasy feeling in my chest. No stray thought in the back of my mind telling me to be careful. Just an ordinary day, a normal evening, and then everything was gone. Her name was Lizette, and for 4 years, I thought she was the love of my life. We met in the most unexpected way, stuck in a rainstorm outside a coffee shop, laughing at the sheer ridiculousness of it all. She was different. Or at least, that's what I let myself believe. Smart, quick-witted, effortlessly charming. She had a way of making the world feel warmer, like she carried the sun in her pocket. From the moment I met her, I was hooked. We built a life together. Late-night talks about our future, lazy Sunday mornings tangled in each other, whispered promises that we'd never be like those couples, the ones who let love fade into routine. When I asked her to marry me, she cried, laughing through her tears as she said yes over and over again. I thought that meant something. I thought it meant everything. But I was wrong. The night it all fell apart started like any other. I was at home, finalizing details for our wedding. We had just put a deposit down on a honeymoon trip to Santorini. I remember looking at the receipt and smiling, imagining her reaction when she found out I had upgraded our room to one with a private view of the sea. She had always talked about waking up to the sound of waves, watching the sunrise with a cup of coffee in hand. I was waiting for her to come home when I got a text. A simple, short message that made my stomach drop. You deserve to know. No number, no name. Just an image attached. My hands trembled as I tapped on it, the air leaving my lungs the second the picture loaded. It was her. Lizette. In the middle of a wild party, one I knew nothing about. The room was dimly lit, neon lights flashing against the walls, bodies packed together in a blur of movement. But she stood out. She was smiling, laughing, lost in the moment. And then my eyes locked on the man beside her. His hands were on her waist. Too familiar. Too intimate. And she wasn't pulling away. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe this was an old photo, taken before we were together. But I knew that wasn't true. She was wearing the dress she left in earlier that evening, the one she had said was just for a quiet dinner with friends. I should have called her right then. Should have demanded an explanation. But instead, I just sat there, staring at the screen, my entire body frozen. My mind raced through every moment we had shared, every time she had told me she loved me. Was it all a lie? Had I been nothing more than a placeholder, someone to keep her comfortable while she lived a separate life? Minutes passed, maybe hours. I don't remember. But eventually, I stood up, walked to the bedroom we had shared for years, looked around at everything we had built together. And that's when I knew I couldn't do this anymore. Without another thought, I grabbed a suitcase from the closet and started packing. Clothes, my passport, anything I would need to leave. Not just for the night. For good. Because I wasn't going to wait for her to come home with some half-hearted excuse. I wasn't going to sit there and listen to her tell me it didn't mean anything. I wasn't going to let her destroy me. I was done. I don't remember the exact moment I made the decision to leave. There wasn't some dramatic realization or a breaking point where I suddenly knew what had to be done. It was more like a series of slow, excruciating heartbeats that carried me toward the inevitable. 1 second, I was sitting in our dimly lit living room, staring at the picture on my phone, my chest so tight I could barely breathe. The next, I was standing in front of our closet, gripping the handle of an old suitcase I hadn't used in years. My hands moved on their own, folding clothes, stuffing them into the suitcase without any real thought or order. Socks, jeans, shirts, a jacket, my passport, my wallet. The engagement ring, still in its velvet box, sat on the nightstand, untouched. I had taken it off earlier in the day, just for a moment, while I was washing dishes. It felt heavier now, like a symbol of something that had almost been real but never truly was. I glanced around the bedroom one last time. This space had been ours, filled with memories, whispered late-night conversations, stolen kisses in the morning before work. Now, it felt unfamiliar. Foreign. Like it had been abandoned long before I even decided to walk away. A part of me still wanted to believe there was some explanation for what I had seen. That maybe, just maybe, this wasn't what it looked like. But deep down, I knew better. Lizette had made a choice. And now, I was making mine. I zipped up the suitcase, the sound cutting through the silence of the apartment like a blade. Then, I walked out the door. The city was still alive, even at this hour. Streetlights cast long shadows over the pavement, Car horns echoed in the distance, and the occasional group of drunken strangers stumbled past, laughing like the night would never end. I envied them. They had no idea how fragile happiness could be, how quickly a single moment could rip the ground out from under you. I had no real plan, no destination, just the overwhelming need to be anywhere but here. My feet carried me toward my car, parked a few blocks away. As I drove, I realized I had nowhere to go, not really. My parents lived out of state. My closest friends had their own lives, their own families. And even if I did crash on someone's couch, what would I say? Hey, mind if I stay a while? Turns out the woman I was about to marry wasn't actually the person I thought she was. No, that wasn't happening. I kept driving, past places I knew, places I had been to with Lizette. The cafe where we had our first date. The park where we once spent an entire afternoon doing nothing but talking. The bakery where she had insisted we pick out a wedding cake together, even though I told her I didn't care what flavor it was. I should have felt something, anger, bitterness, resentment. But instead, there was just emptiness. Then my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it. I knew it had to be her. But the buzzing didn't stop. Message after message came through, filling the silence in the car like a relentless drumbeat. Finally, against my better judgment, I pulled over and looked at the screen. Lizette, 12 missed calls, 9 messages. Merrick, where are you? I can explain. Please don't do this. I swear it's not what you think. Just talk to me. This isn't fair. Not fair? The audacity of that word sent a bitter laugh up my throat. Not fair? I stared at the messages, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. For a split second, I almost responded. Almost asked her why. Almost let myself get sucked back into the chaos of it all. But then, I thought about that picture. About the way she was smiling, completely at ease, lost in the moment. And I turned off my phone. As I sat there in the driver's seat, parked on an empty street, I finally let the reality sink in. The wedding wasn't happening. The life I had planned wasn't real. The woman I loved was a stranger. And just like that, I realized I wasn't just leaving Lizette. I was disappearing from her world completely. I don't know how long I sat there in my car, staring at the darkened screen of my phone. The weight in my chest wasn't anger, it wasn't even sadness. It was something heavier, something quieter. A realization that the life I had built in my head, the one where Lizette and I were partners, soulmates, best friends, it had never truly existed. It was a mirage, something I had convinced myself was real because I wanted it to be. I could hear the city outside, the faint hum of distant traffic, the occasional laughter of people stumbling home from a night out. I envied them. They weren't questioning everything they thought they knew about someone they loved. They weren't sitting in a parked car, suitcase in the backseat, trying to figure out where their life was supposed to go next. Lizette had called me 12 times. 12. I hadn't answered once. A part of me wanted to, just to hear the excuses, the scrambling for some kind of damage control. But what was the point? What explanation could possibly justify what I had seen? She had looked happy in that picture. Completely at ease, lost in the moment with some guy I didn't know. That was the part that burned the most. Not that she had done it, but that it had seemed so easy for her. Like it was second nature. Like I wasn't even a thought in her mind. I took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. This was it. The moment where I had to decide. Do I turn around? Do I go home and let her feed me whatever lies she had prepared? Do I listen to her voice crack as she tells me it was just a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, that it was stupid and she regrets it? Or do I keep driving? My fingers hovered over the ignition. Then I made my decision. I didn't go to a friend's house. I didn't check into a hotel. I drove, miles outside the city, past familiar streets, past neighborhoods where every turn had a memory attached to it. I didn't want to be anywhere I had been with her. I didn't want to see the remnants of the life I had almost stepped into. At some point, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a roadside diner. It was one of those places that looked like it hadn't changed since the 80s, faded red booths, a neon sign buzzing overhead, the faint smell of burnt coffee and grease in the air. I sat at the counter, running my fingers over the rim of the ceramic mug the waitress placed in front of me. I hadn't even ordered coffee, but she must have seen something in my face, something that told her I needed it. "You okay, hon?" she asked, her voice soft but knowing. I almost laughed at the question. Was I okay? What did that even mean right now? I was supposed to get married in 3 weeks, I said, surprising myself with how easily the words came out. But I just found out my fiancée had other plans tonight. She didn't react the way I expected. No wide eyes, no shock, No pity? Just a small nod, like she had heard this story before. People show you who they are when they think you're not looking, she said, refilling my coffee. You saw her. That's all that matters now. I exhaled, running a hand down my face. She was right. I had seen Lizette for who she really was. And there was no going back from that. The wedding wasn't happening. My life wasn't going to unfold the way I had planned. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe it was a blessing in disguise. I pulled my phone from my pocket, staring at the screen. More missed calls. More messages. I didn't read them. Instead, I deleted her number. And for the first time since that night started, I felt something close to peace. I never really understood the phrase disappearing without a trace. People say it all the time, but they don't think about what it actually means. It's not just about leaving. It's about erasing yourself from someone else's world. It's about making sure there's nothing left behind for them to grab onto, nothing that ties you to a past that no longer exists. I had always imagined leaving someone was dramatic. A slammed door, a shouting match, a final exchange of words meant to hurt. But reality is quieter than that. It's sitting in the driver's seat with a packed suitcase, staring at the road ahead and realizing you don't owe anyone an explanation. That night at the diner, I made up my mind. I wasn't going back. Not to our apartment. Not to Lizette. Not to the life I had spent years building around a person who never actually existed the way I thought she did. The question wasn't if I was leaving. It was how far I was willing to go. I sat at the counter long after my coffee had gone cold. I wasn't in a hurry. The rest of my life was now just an open road, an empty map with no coordinates. I could go anywhere, be anyone. That realization was freeing, but it was also terrifying. The waitress, the same one who had poured my coffee without asking, came back around and set a fresh cup in front of me. You figure out where you're headed yet? She asked, not looking up as she wiped down the counter. I let out a slow breath. Not yet. She nodded, as if that answer made perfect sense to her. Maybe it did. That's the hardest part, she said. Not the leaving. The deciding where to go next. She wasn't wrong. I had already left Lizette in every way that mattered. But what came after? That part was still blank. I pulled out my phone again. I had deleted her number earlier, but that didn't stop the messages from coming through. The latest one sat unread on my screen. Lizette, I came home. Merrick. Where are you? Can we just talk? I stared at the message. It was the first one that didn't feel like an excuse or a desperate attempt to control the situation. It was just a question. But I didn't have an answer for her. I put my phone face down on the counter and reached for my coffee instead. You mind if I ask you something? The waitress said after a moment. I glanced up. Go ahead. You still love her? The question hit harder than I expected. Did I? I thought about everything we had shared. The late-night drives, the weekends spent doing absolutely nothing, the mornings where she would steal all the blankets and act like it wasn't on purpose. There was love in all of that. There had been love. But love isn't enough. Not when trust is gone. So I shook my head. Not anymore. The waitress smiled like she had been waiting for me to say that. Then I'd say you're already halfway there. By the time I left the diner, the night had settled into that strange in-between space where it wasn't quite late anymore but not yet morning. The streets were quiet, the neon signs of motels flickering in and out like they couldn't decide if they were still open for business. I drove with no destination in mind. Just kept going, letting the miles put distance between me and the life I had left behind. At some point, I passed a gas station and pulled over. Not because I needed gas. I had more than half a tank left. I just needed a second. The air was crisp when I stepped out of the car, the kind that reminded me summer was ending. I leaned against the hood, staring up at the sky. No city lights to drown out the stars here. It was quiet, peaceful. And then, against my better judgment, I turned my phone back on. More messages. More missed calls. But one stood out. It wasn't from Lizette. It was from her sister, Delia. Delia, Merrick, I don't know what's going on between you two, but she's not okay. I frowned, rereading the message. Not okay? What did that even mean? My fingers hesitated over the keyboard. I wasn't supposed to care. I was supposed to be moving on, putting as much space between myself and her as possible. But something about that message stuck with me. I didn't reply. Instead, I just turned my phone off again. Because Lizette wasn't my problem anymore. I had a new life to figure out, and I wasn't going to let her pull me back in. The road stretched ahead, an empty ribbon of asphalt leading nowhere in particular. The gas station lights faded behind me, swallowed by the night. I had no real plan, no destination. I just knew I couldn't stop. Stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling. I didn't want to feel. I had spent 4 years building a future with Lizette, and in the span of a single night, it had unraveled like a loose thread I hadn't even realized was there. One moment, everything was intact. The next, it was falling apart in my hands. I should have been relieved. I should have been angry. Instead, I just felt hollow. The miles blurred together. Towns passed in a haze of neon signs and empty highways. At some point, I pulled over at a 24-hour diner, not because I was hungry, but because the weight of exhaustion had finally caught up with me. The place was nearly empty. A tired-looking waitress wiped down the counter while an old man nursed a cup of coffee in the corner. The air smelled like burnt toast and cheap cologne. I slid into a booth, staring at the menu without really reading it. My phone sat on the table, dark and silent. I had turned it off hours ago, shutting out Lizette and whatever half-hearted attempts she was making to explain herself. But Delia's message still lingered in my mind. Merrick, I don't know what's going on between you two, but she's not okay. I didn't know what to make of it. Was it guilt? A manipulation tactic? Or was Lizette actually falling apart now that I was gone? And why did I even care? A waitress appeared at my side, chewing gum like she was counting down the minutes until her shift ended. You want coffee? I nodded. She poured it without a word, the dark liquid swirling in the cup like ink bleeding into water. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. I had expected to feel free. Wasn't that what I wanted? To break away? To start over? Then why did it feel like something was still holding me back? I was halfway through my coffee when my phone buzzed. Not a call. Not a text. A voicemail. I hesitated. It was probably just Lizette, another plea for me to just talk to her. But something in my gut told me to listen. So I pressed play. At first, all I heard was breathing. Shaky, uneven. Then, her voice, low, almost a whisper. Merrick, please. I know you hate me. I know I deserve it. But I don't know what to do. Her voice cracked. You just disappeared. I came home, and you were gone, and she exhaled sharply. I don't even know why I'm calling. You won't answer. But I needed to say I'm sorry. Not that it matters now. Silence. A long pause. Then, just before the message cut off. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if I want to. But I can't breathe knowing you're out there somewhere, hating me. Then a click. The message ended. I stared at the phone, my chest tight. I shouldn't have cared. I shouldn't have felt anything at all. But I did. Because the thing about love, the thing no one tells you, is that it doesn't just shut off when someone hurts you. It lingers. It stays in the cracks, in the spaces between anger and heartbreak. Lizette had betrayed me. She had thrown away our future for a night of reckless fun. But she was still the woman I had loved for 4 years. And now, she was unraveling. I pressed my fingertips against my temples, breathing deeply. I could delete the message. Move on. Never look back. Or I could do what I always did, get sucked back in, let her voice pull me into the wreckage, let her apologies twist my emotions until I couldn't tell what was real anymore. I took another sip of coffee, staring at the phone like it held all the answers. Then, I made my decision. I dialed a number. Not hers. Delia's. It rang twice before she picked up. Merrick. Her voice was laced with hesitation, like she hadn't expected me to call. You said she's not okay, I said, cutting straight to the point. What's going on? There was a pause. Then a slow exhale. She's a mess. She hasn't slept. She's barely eating. She keeps saying she doesn't know what to do. I swallowed hard. That's not my problem anymore. I know, Delia said. But I also know you. And I don't think you'd be calling me if you didn't still care. I closed my eyes. She wasn't wrong. But maybe caring was my biggest mistake. I sat in that booth long after my coffee had gone cold, staring at the phone like it had just handed me a death sentence. Delia's words echoed in my head, looping on repeat. She's a mess. She hasn't slept. She's barely eating. She keeps saying she doesn't know what to do. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles going white. This was exactly what I didn't want. I had left to escape all of this, the questions, the guilt, the unbearable weight of everything Lizette and I had built crumbling into dust. I had done the right thing, hadn't I? But then why did it feel like my chest was caving in? You good, Han? The waitress was back, her sharp eyes scanning me like she had seen my exact kind of broken 100 times before. I forced a nod. Yeah, just tired. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push it either. just refilled my coffee and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I could do nothing. Ignore Delia's call. Let Lizette spiral. Let whatever mess she had gotten herself into be her problem. That's what she deserved, right? She had made a choice that night, and this was just the fallout. But then, deep down, I knew this wasn't about her anymore. This was about me. I could walk away from her. From the wedding, from the future we had planned, from everything we were supposed to be. But I couldn't walk away from myself. I had to see her. Not to fix things. Not to let her drag me back into her orbit. But because I needed closure. Because if I didn't face this now, it would haunt me forever. I sighed, pressing my fingers against my temples. I was really about to do this, wasn't I? I threw a few bills onto the table, grabbed my jacket, and walked out into the night. The drive back to the city felt longer than it should have. The road stretched on forever, empty except for the occasional semi-truck speeding past. The silence was suffocating, my mind filling in the blanks with memories I didn't want to relive. The way Lizette had smiled at me the night before she left for that party. The way she had kissed me, told me she loved me, promised we were on the same page about everything. Lies. All of it. And yet, here I was, driving straight toward the wreckage, like some part of me still needed proof that it had all really happened. By the time I pulled up outside her apartment, my hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly I thought my fingers might snap. The place looked the same, but it felt different. Like I was stepping onto foreign ground. I killed the engine but didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the building, at the window that had once been ours, at the dim glow of the living room lights. Then I exhaled slowly and got out. The hallway smelled the same, faint traces of vanilla from the scented candles Lizette always insisted on buying. It felt surreal, walking up to a door I had unlocked 1,000 times, only now, I was on the outside looking in. I knocked. Silence. Then, after a few seconds, footsteps. The door cracked open, and there she was. Lizette. She looked wrecked. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair a mess, her oversized sweater hanging off one shoulder like she hadn't bothered to fix it. She blinked at me like she couldn't believe I was real. Merrick. Her voice was barely above a whisper. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, staring at each other, both of us ghosts of the people we had been just days ago. Then she stepped back, opening the door wider. Come in. I hesitated. I shouldn't have. I should have said no, should have stayed outside, kept the distance I had worked so hard to put between us. But I stepped inside anyway. The apartment was a mess. Dishes in the sink, half-empty wine glasses on the coffee table, a blanket crumpled up on the couch like she had been sleeping there instead of in her bed. You look terrible, I said before I could stop myself. She let out a dry, humorless laugh. Yeah, well, it's been a rough couple of days. I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. I got your voicemail. She flinched. I wasn't sure if you'd listen to it. I did. A heavy silence settled between us. Then, finally, she sighed and ran a hand through her hair. I don't even know where to start. I scoffed. You could start with why. She swallowed hard. I don't have a good answer. I clenched my jaw. Try anyway. Lizette exhaled shakily, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking. It was stupid and reckless, and she shook her head. It wasn't worth losing you. I narrowed my eyes. Then why do it? She didn't have an answer. Just looked down at the floor like she was hoping it would swallow her whole. I sighed, running a hand over my face. You know, I spent the last few days trying to figure out if I even wanted to hear you out. If I even cared enough to ask why. But the truth is, it doesn't matter. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. Merrick. I'm not here to fix this, I cut her off. I'm not here to forgive you or to try to understand something that doesn't make sense. I'm here because I needed to see you one last time. To remind myself that whatever this was, it's over. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For a long moment, she just stood there, her eyes glassy, her hands trembling at her sides. Then, quietly, she asked, was it all a lie? I frowned. What? She swallowed hard. Everything we had. The past 4 years. Were they just nothing to you? Something in my chest twisted. Because that was the thing that had kept me up at night, that had made this so much harder than it should have been. Because no, it wasn't a lie. I had loved her. Fully, completely, with everything I had. But love isn't enough when trust is gone. So I took a step back, toward the door. They weren't nothing, I said quietly. But they're over now. Lizette inhaled sharply, like I had just knocked the air out of her lungs. I turned before she could say anything else, before I could second-guess myself. And then, for the last time, I walked away. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing off the past in a single, quiet motion. I expected to feel something, relief, closure, maybe even a final pang of regret. But instead, there was only a strange kind of stillness. The world outside was the same as when I had walked in, the same distant hum of traffic, the same glow of streetlights stretching shadows along the sidewalk. And yet, everything felt different. I didn't rush to my car. Instead, I just stood there for a moment, breathing in the night air, letting the weight of what had just happened settle over me. That was it. The last conversation. The last time I would see Lizette's face twisted in confusion, her voice laced with something that almost sounded like pain. She had asked me if it was all a lie. And maybe that was the worst part, knowing that for her. Maybe it had been. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but in the way that some people live their lives without ever truly thinking about what they're doing, about the promises they make, the words they say, the love they accept without fully knowing if they can return it. For me, it had been real. For her, maybe it had just been convenient. I walked to my car, sliding behind the wheel and gripping the steering wheel with both hands. The apartment building loomed in the rearview mirror, one window still glowing faintly with the light from inside. I thought about turning my phone back on, checking my messages, seeing if she had texted me again now that I was gone. But I didn't. Instead, I put the car in drive and pulled away. I drove without direction, letting the city slip past in a blur of neon signs and headlights, the occasional pedestrian stumbling along the sidewalk in the glow of late-night bars. I didn't want to go back to the motel I had checked into when I first left. That place felt temporary, a waiting room between the life I had left and the one I hadn't yet figured out. I needed something else. A fresh start. Somewhere she had never been. Somewhere our life together had no roots. At a red light, I pulled out my phone, not to check messages, but to search for flights. Anywhere. Everywhere. Just something to put distance between myself and the ghost of the wedding that had almost happened. Chicago. Denver. Seattle. I scrolled through the list, my finger hesitating over destinations that felt too familiar, too connected to memories I wasn't ready to confront. And then, my eyes landed on something unexpected. A small coastal town I had never heard of, buried in the middle of nowhere, its airport nothing more than a single terminal. Flights were cheap, barely a blip on my savings. It was perfect. Without hesitating, I booked the ticket. The flight left in 8 hours. Enough time to grab my things, settle whatever loose ends were left, and leave the city behind for good. By the time I got back to the motel, exhaustion had settled into my bones. Not just the kind that came from lack of sleep, but the deeper kind, the kind that pressed into your chest and made every movement feel heavier than it should be. I tossed my keys onto the nightstand, kicking off my shoes and collapsing onto the bed. My phone buzzed. I stared at it. I already knew who it was. Lizette. I let it ring. She didn't leave a voicemail this time. Maybe she had finally gotten the message. Or maybe, like me, she was just too tired to keep fighting a battle that had already been lost. I turned my phone face down and closed my eyes. For the first time in days, I let sleep take me. The airport was nearly empty when I arrived the next morning, the sun barely breaking over the horizon as I checked in for my flight. I carried nothing but a single suitcase. Everything else, our apartment, our plans, the life I had spent 4 years building, stayed behind. As I sat at the gate, waiting for boarding to begin, I felt something unfamiliar settle over me. It wasn't regret. It wasn't anger. It was something lighter, something that almost felt like peace. I didn't know what was waiting for me on the other side of this flight, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to find out. The plane rumbled as it taxied down the runway, the engines humming beneath my feet. I stared out the window, watching as the city I had once called home shrank into the distance, fading into nothing but a speck on the horizon. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled without feeling like I was holding on to something heavy. This was it. A clean break. I didn't know what was waiting for me on the other side of this flight, but that was the beauty of it. I didn't need to know. I had spent too much time trying to control everything, trying to make sure my life followed the perfect plan. And where had that gotten me? Heartbroken, betrayed, wasting nights in cheap motels, replaying moments that no longer mattered. No more. This was my chance to start over, to rebuild, to live for myself, instead of for a future that had been nothing more than an illusion. The plane lifted off the ground, and with it, something inside me felt lighter. The town was exactly what I needed it to be, small, quiet, untouched by the past. The first thing I noticed was the air. Fresh, crisp, carrying the scent of the ocean. The second thing was the silence. Not the heavy, suffocating kind, but the peaceful kind. The kind that made you feel like you had all the time in the world to figure things out. I checked into a modest little inn near the coast, the kind of place that felt like it belonged to a different era. The woman at the front desk handed me my key with a warm smile. No questions asked. "First time in town?" she asked. I nodded. "Well, welcome to your fresh start." She didn't know my story, but somehow, she had said exactly what I needed to hear. I spent the next few days just existing, walking along the shore, letting the waves wash away whatever pieces of my old life still clung to me. Drinking coffee in quiet cafes, reading books I never had time for before. I wasn't rushing to figure out my next move. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to be someone's fiancé. I wasn't planning a wedding. I wasn't trying to fit into the mold of a perfect future that had never truly been mine. I was just me, and that was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky into streaks of orange and pink, I found myself sitting outside a little bookstore, a half-empty cup of tea in my hands. That's when I met Eleanor. She was closing up shop, struggling with a box that looked far too heavy for her to be carrying alone. Without thinking, I stood up. "Need a hand?" She turned, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That obvious?" I smiled. "A little." She laughed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I realized this was what life was supposed to feel like. Not heavy, not complicated, just effortless. I didn't know where this road was leading me, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. Because sometimes, the best things in life aren't planned. Sometimes, walking away isn't the end. It's the beginning that almost wasn't.